Okay, hello everyone. I'm here again with Dr. Norbert Kraft, Mars One's Chief Medical Officer and head of their crew selection program. For those of you who don't know, Dr. Kraft has over 20 years of experience in aviation and aerospace research and development. His primary expertise area being developing psychological and physiological countermeasures to combat the negative effects of long-duration human spaceflight. So I was just wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your past and present research, Dr. Kraft?
My research goes back to Austria, where actually I started in 1994 to work with military for fighter pilots and for an astronaut, and we developed equipment, against muscle deconditioning and bone demineralization. And just to make it very short, I went to the Japanese Space Agency after that for 5 years. Worked with them on selecting 3 of the current astronauts. I helped selecting because you have not only one person who selects people. And there we used the isolation chamber, basically. That was the first time to use it. And we put them in for 14 days. And out of 8 applicants, we selected 3 out of that. And it was very, very interesting to see how it changes. If a person is very good in talking, giving interviews, but then in the chamber, when they come to the real thing, so to speak,
then you see who they really are.
Right, exactly, and that was the point. He just, for example, isolated himself from the group and so on. So then I had a very nice possibility. So the Russian Space Agency worked together with the European, the Canadian, and the Japanese Space Agency on 110 days. In some, it was 264 days isolation experiment. And that gave me a big chance because I was an investigator there. And suddenly they said one of the applicants didn't arrive. Do I want to jump in? And I said, yes, I want to do that. And the reason is you have to experience on yourself, then you know what you talk about it. So a lot of scientists just looking from outside to inside and making up all these things without really having experienced it, really know what's going on and what's happening. And then I came in 2002 to NASA, and then I worked in NASA and the topic was basically always the same: what is the best crew for long-duration spaceflight? So, and then I came to Mars One, and I could, what I did in NASA and the other places, in so-called in a sandbox experiment, I can put into reality, and this is one of the I think this is one of the best dreams for scientists to put what you tested out, to put it actually in the reality and see it.
Yeah, so how did you originally become involved with Mars One? Did you just get approached or something? I was just wondering, because that must have made for a very interesting conversation.
Yes, so what happened is Bas Lansdorp, he's our CEO, and he was reading the book from Mary Roach.
Packing for Mars?
Packing for Mars, and she mentioned me a couple of times, and she interviewed me for that book, and that's how he came to San Jose. And he said, "Hey, Norbert," we were sitting down in a cafe. He said, "Hey, are you interested in joining me?" And I said, "Okay, there's a lot of obstacles. How is the feasibility? How is the technological? How is the finances?" And he told me he talked with all these companies, which I knew, Paragon and Lockheed Martin and other companies. So I thought, okay, from the technology point, it sounds feasible because I'm not an engineer. So I said, yes, I would love to take the human part. This is what I did all the years, and I will do the best. And that's how we came about me being in the Mars One, basically.
Yeah, it must have been very interesting just suddenly meeting someone and them saying, "Hey, I'm organising a mission to Mars. Do you want to help select the astronauts or something?" That must have been interesting.
Oh, it's exciting, no question. Yeah.
So what I want to talk about now is that there's been a lot of fuss in the media ever since October because of a particular MIT report which was studied. I'll just briefly go through a very short summary of what it says. So it says that if you don't use local resources on Mars, then because you overproduce oxygen due to your plant in the greenhouse module, you then have to vent out that excess air so that you don't have a fire risk. But the problem is you can't differentiate between oxygen and nitrogen, so that causes you to lose your nitrogen in your storage tanks, and eventually when you run out of nitrogen entirely, around day 60 or so of their simulation, then you effectively lose the partial pressure of your oxygen because you're losing it due to leaks in your habitat modules, and then once the partial pressure gets too low, oxygen can no longer diffuse through your alveoli in your lungs, and you suffocate. So that's what the study says. But I think part of the problem is the media seems to equate not using local resources to any mission to Mars will cause you to die in 68 days. So I was wondering if you could comment a bit on the technical aspects of it.
So I'm commenting on the scientific aspect.
Yes.
Because I'm not in engineering, so I'm not touching other people's area. So at first it is, how to call it, a student of MIT tried to write a paper basically to present in a conference. And now let's look at the scientific point what he did. So he looked at a website and he didn't speak to Bas Landstop. He didn't speak to the providers, Paragon, where Bas Landstop go for these problems, for example. And then he used from different places, or he will use from NASA this and from somewhere this, and then he made up assumptions and stories. So in general, from a scientific point, you cannot do that. You have to work with facts if you have it. I give you a simple example. Elon Musk says he makes a new energy efficient car. I read this on his website, and then I say, oh, but he will take a part from here and part from there, and now the car after 5 miles will explode. That's not scientific at all. And this is my basic criticism on that. You have to work with facts. You cannot make up stuff and come to a conclusion suddenly.
Yeah, and to be fair to the students, I mean, I've read their report and they do state what their assumptions are. And part of it probably is because obviously a lot of Mars One specific technical details for their designs aren't in the public domain at the moment. So you can understand kind of they didn't really have much to work with. But I completely agree that they should have actually approached Mars One and spoken to Paragon before running the simulation itself.
And you have to think also, if everything is written out on a website everybody can access, then a department of technological espionage is not necessary anymore, because you put it out for everybody anyway how to copy it. So every company, Paragon and others, really keep the things how they do it, and because he doesn't know how to do it, it doesn't mean Paragon doesn't know how to do it. Yeah. And they are very successful. On the International Space Station, they have the life support systems up, and still everybody's alive.
Yeah, well, the International Space Station has a very good track. And not to mention, of course, that Mars One obviously are going to be releasing Paragon's conceptual design study so that people in the scientific community can openly access it and then critique it. And I think at the very least what the MIT study has done is it's encouraged an open dialogue. Part of the problem is just how the media has portrayed it. I particularly enjoyed reading the report. It obviously showed that the students cared about the project and they were interested. But obviously a lot of it was just based on the limited data set that they had to work with. Although I'm a little concerned because they say in their report that they wanted to open up their software, open source effectively, and let anyone change it and fiddle around with it. And as far as I can see, they haven't actually released that, even though the report came out back in October. So I think both sides would probably benefit from being more open, but I'm very much looking forward to the Paragon study coming out next month. That should hopefully allay people's concerns.
Yeah, but of course you have to understand they can't open everything, because that even the US government does not allow them to do it. Yeah. So we have to think about, there are a lot of things who cannot be in the open that never can basically redo it. And to come back to the point of using, and see, this is a criticizing facts. So I remembered after my isolation chamber study, I went to a conference, a space conference, and a professor in the front stood and said, oh, this and this happened in an isolation chamber, and therefore I make my conclusion about this and this.
You can't generalize. It's just...
and this is the same was what the MIT student did. And I raised my hand and I said, I'm sorry, the facts you're basing your conclusion on are completely wrong. And she asked, how do you know? And said, because I was actually there.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I really admire you for, that you're not just someone on the outside just subjecting people to an isolation chamber and the experience. You've actually gone in there yourselves and you actually understand the internal psychology as well as what you're seeing externally.
So what I would have expected actually from an MIT student in general who work in the scientific community, he comes up and say, this is the way how you can do it. Or this might be an idea how you do it. And that's how everybody can progress and strive, and not just making assumptions, put it out to get a presentation done or whatever he wanted. So that's, I see, as a basic problem. To give new ideas, that's what we are looking for from scientists, from students. Yeah. And say, this is a possibility, there is the way to go, it's my idea. And beside all these things, I think the step is still far too early, because we will test everything on Earth. So
you're not going to send people to Mars unless you know the systems are working, and for a full year actually in the Mars One plan. So even if there was a catastrophic failure in the life support system, you're not putting human lives at risk. That's a key tenet of Mars One's plan.
Exactly. So when we test it here, then we see if it's working. And that's what I'm not getting into the details, because I say these are my requirements, and then we test it out and see if it works. And then if you do it on Earth first, they just open the door and go out. We have all the measurement system and so on. So I'm not so worried about it. Let me talk about another interesting comment. It was a professor from the, I didn't know if you read that article. He is from the Strasbourg University. Interesting. So his comment was, and when they arrive, they will be not strong enough to stand up.
Okay.
So it's very interesting. He comes from the engineering department, and why he talks about bone and muscles, I'm not sure, but as you studied and as you learned by yourself, in general, you lose 20% of your muscle mass in 6 months. We know this from the International Space Station.
Yeah.
This is an average. Let's say our astronauts going to Mars are lazy or more lazy. They lose 40%. So there are still 60% left. And Mars has, and if we give it a little bit more, 40% of the gravity. So they are still much, much stronger than anybody who arrives back on Earth. So they have plus 20%.
That's when you assume you're not doing anything on the way to Mars to mitigate muscle loss. We also know from studies of astronauts who've gone to space that there is direct proportionality between if you spend more time exercising, then your recovery period once you return to Earth decreases. I know there have been at least one case where someone exercised so vigorously, I believe it was on Mir actually, that she was able to walk out of the capsule when she first landed. So it's not an insurmountable problem.
Polyakov too, but the point what I say, he's making just stuff up with even to the mass. So how would you not, when you have 60%, which means 20% more muscle mass than you need at all, and then you can't stand up? A simple mass would give him that answer. So that's kind of interesting approach he did. And in general, people misunderstand. Even if the astronauts can walk out to safety reasons, they put them in a chair. It's not they put him in a chair because he can't walk. It's a safety reason why they put him in. So a lot of people don't understand. But they're coming back to Earth. So I think my assumption, Professor misunderstood. They're coming back to Earth. No, they're going on Mars, and Mars has only 40% or even less gravity than Earth. So the second point he put up, and there was another one, he said, when they are on Mars in this habitat, they become depressed, suicidal, and homicidal.
Okay.
So I'm thinking, wow, as another topic, as an engineer, interesting. If he never was in isolation chamber, I'm pretty sure about that. And he's making this stuff up to basically say, like, it remembers me on Mary Roach's book, when she wrote about, the train is now driving faster, and the scientists said, everybody will get crazy seeing the trees rushing by. And then we have...
and then you have obviously the problem of when you go into orbit, the first person who goes on a spacewalk will look at the Earth and just go mad from being able to see the void and everything, and that didn't happen. It's just...
Right. It was the airplanes when they said everybody gets a heart attack when a passenger flying in an airplane. Or how can the astronauts swallow in zero gravity to be able to drink anything? So he's on that level of scientists, basically, who just, I don't know.
Create problems out of the ether, effectively.
Right. That's correct. And the third study, which was interesting, is, and you mentioned a little bit about only females to Mars.
So I'll just say a little bit about the backlash, because there was an interesting study that came out from the NASA High Seas experiment, which is a 4-month simulation Mars mission in a geodesic dome in Hawaii. And the interesting thing that it found is that the most metabolically active male member of the crew burn an average of around 3,400 calories per day, whilst the least metabolically active female only expended around 1,500 calories per day. So that raises the interesting perspective of, if females only use about half the calories of males, does it make sense from a purely resource efficiency standpoint just to send an all-female crew to Mars?
So if you look at that, it's a NASA-funded study. The point here is, are you reducing humans to batteries? That's the first question. Are we just batteries in the views of some researchers? This is number one. And I think human as a battery, then that's just not the approach how to go. And then people might be right. with saying, oh, they get depressed or suicidal or whatever because we just sent them because they're the better battery. But we are, as humans, far more than just a battery itself. The next point is, let's look at her study. She has 3 male and 3 females. That makes 6 people. A study with 6 people is not really saying anything at all. I do 600 and I prove you the opposite direction. And she measured it just with a wristband, if I was correct, on energy consumption.
Yeah, it's just in a single week.
And who were the male and female? So I want to see that study where you put out very muscular females, huge muscular females, and very tiny, skinny. The same result. And she didn't do that either. So did she mean that these people are really equally in size and in muscle mass and so on, or she just took strong males and then some skinny females? So you see, this study by itself is completely flawed. Besides, even it would be hypothetical, which I don't think correct, we are not batteries. We are far more batteries.
Of course, and one thing that I think is the point that it completely sidesteps is, sure, it might be more energy efficient in order to do that. But the question is, particularly if you want to have people living on Mars, what is the most stable psychological configuration? So I was wondering if you can comment on the rationale behind having 50-50 male-female ratios in Mars One's crews.
Yeah, so that's why we did the study. So we looked really in the performance of male groups, female groups, and mixed gender groups. And the mixed gender groups had the best performance. And I'm looking at performance. I don't looking about energy efficiency. You say only skinny little people are allowed to go if they're more efficient than the others. I'm looking what is the best performance.
So how did you measure performance?
Performance we measured in one of the, we have a lot of cases, but in one of the cases I gave you was actually a computer game basically. So they gave a problem ahead of time and they have to come up with a strategy, with a plan, and find resources on Mars, on Moon, depends what scenario we had up. And they had to find the resources, deploy the resources with each other, communicate with each other, and work together as a team. And it wouldn't work if you don't work as a team. Yeah. So you cannot succeed in that computer simulation game if you don't work as a team. So that was one of these main scenarios we did. And there we saw that really the most communication and the performance the highest were in mixed gender crews.
Okay. One other thing I was going to mention about crew composition, I was wondering about if you had any research about the kind of age distribution that you thought would work best in a crew. Does it work best if, say, they're all young, all old, or a mix of ages? I was wondering if there's any research about that?
No, we didn't make a research with age differences. However, I go from the point of view, and we will work over the years and see if my hypothesis is correct. I think young has to be mixed with older ones because you have the young, energetic one who wants to go forward, but sometimes don't think it enough through, whereas the older one who is a little bit complacent and need the activity from the young, but he reminds everybody, okay, we have to be careful, we have to think forward and so on. I think that mix...
Yeah, and having more life experience is never a bad thing, of course.
Very well, but we will see how it works. And that's the basic idea, really to mix the crews in gender, age, and internationally. And this will give us a really huge problem by itself. But the outcome is much better because you have the conflicts which will occur without a question because of age, because of cultural differences, because of gender differences. But if you overcome these conflicts, then the outcome is a much better one in the end. The performance is a much better one. You get all these inputs from the side because one say, okay, if you're in this isolated environment, you start losing perception. And everybody starts thinking the same way. You have this group think, and group thinks leads to mistakes, what we know from our history, Pearl Harbor and other reasons. So, but if you have the different cultures, there are always new input. You know, you have the different genders, you have the different ages, so new input from different sides, from different views, and that should keep you up, to keep your perception to not starting to fall into a group thing, which is one of the things.
Yes, so I'd like to move on to something slightly different now. There's just a few residual questions that we had from last time about the astronaut selection and the training. Mm-hmm. So that I know there was a little bit of confusion on one of the Mars One Facebook groups about whether the just a bit of confusion from it how you interpret the Mars 1 selection round. Whether it precedes the training, or whether the fourth round is the name of the training. Because my understanding is that round 3 with the 2-week residential we talked about last time effectively selects something on the order of the final 50. Those 50 then go into a simulation mission, which is round 4, and that's used to select the final 24. So I wondered if you could clear that up.
Oh, that's pretty much, you got it. That is correct. Yeah. So it is, but the training and the isolation will be the same time at the same place. So it's not.
Yeah.
They have this not the training, the team selection. They come in groups of teams, 10 to 15 approximately, no? And after that they will be reduced. You say 50, but I'm not sure if it's 50 or it's 40 or whatever it is. But they will be reduced, and they go immediately in the isolation. So that's the same period of time. So it's not going home and coming back. That's the same period of time. And after that, they're 24. And when they're selected at 24, then the training starts. And the training starts for, if they make it through, for 10 years. So it's not just a five-minute training.
Yeah, that certainly makes sense. One other question that I had is, you mentioned that round 3 effectively is a 2-week residential, so that people can budget to, say, be away from work for 2 weeks. But you also said that then those that pass round 3 will then immediately go into the simulation mission for round 4. So some people are wondering how long they should plan to take off work if they were to get selected for the 4th round.
It's the 3 and 4 is 2 weeks.
Oh, 3 and 4 together is 2 weeks.
Yes.
Oh, okay, that makes more sense. Okay.
Because they said immediately from the group you will go into isolation. So I really don't want to make it longer than 2 weeks that they can take a vacation off. I mean, in the end, it will be with the broadcaster, but I think I try to push it into 2 weeks. The final word is by the broadcaster in the end, no?
Okay. So do you know roughly? Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so I want to push both into 2 weeks, basically. No?
Okay. I wondered if you knew roughly what the breakdown will be between round 3 and round 4. Because I assume if you want to do a proper isolation experiment, you would need at least a week, because there's always like a transition period when you go into that kind of isolation. So I was wondering about if you had an idea on how long the group challenges would take versus the isolation.
So my basic ideas of group challenges, 3 days, something like that, and the rest for isolation. I want to keep the isolation as long as I can and still give them just the vacation time.
Okay, I think that's a good idea. And you mentioned taking place around the autumn, so I don't know, September, October-ish time, but I assume it's not set in stone yet because of the broadcaster.
Yeah, so well, for 99% it will not be in summer. I don't think a broadcaster is so quick. So I think autumn, winter time, earliest period. But we will let everybody know as soon as we know when the broadcasters start. Okay, now we will film, because they have to find a place, they have to film. And we need an isolation chamber too. So one is not built yet, so it has to be built too. So it will be, I think, autumn or later.
Okay, that certainly makes sense. Could you say a few words about how you personally envision the TV broadcasting as linking into the astronaut selection rounds and eventually into the training?
The broadcasting is 2 things. So the selection is one different part. I'm talking more about the training, what I have basically envisioned. So for the training, my vision is that we have groups of 4, and the groups of 4 get a trainer. So I think that would be a very nice thing. And then everybody asks me, how is the public involved? So the public has a possibility to say, I sponsor this trainer, because trainer have different prices, for example. So I like this group, like in a sports event. I support the Giants and I support the Hawks or whatever it is. And I pay for this group, which I really think this is an awesome group. I want to support it. I can pay for a trainer, which may be more expensive than another trainer for that group. I think that would be the best. So all trainers are good, but you have, as a public, a kind of choice to say, I want this. And then I said, I want to do something for my group. So we will give opportunities what they can purchase more or less for the groups, and say, hey, I want the group has more of this or more of that, to give them an advantage. So that would be very, that's my idea. I didn't say
that does sound a lot like the Hunger Games, though, in terms of having sponsors and things, which should be interesting.
Yeah, I don't like to do.
Yeah, I don't like the analogy, but
kill each other.
Yes, of course.
But the point is, I want to go away from this reality. I want that you see it more as competing clubs, sport clubs, basically, no? Where each is by itself. We'll have each group, my ideas have a name, you know. So you have the sport clubs, like sport clubs. You support them, you sponsor them from different sides, and
It's
so
a very collaborative competition. That's the best way by competition. That's how you work out what is the best, what works best, by having different ideas competing against each other. So I think that's a good idea.
right, and the groups will also tell them what they are thinking about the structure, what they're thinking about if they are an anarchistic group, if they are a military structure group, and then let the public decide. Oh, I think this, I like that system, so I support it. Basically, with some little things, it will not make a huge difference, but this is my idea. In the end, the broadcast, well, sorry, we'll have to say something about too. But that's the basic idea, to make it interesting for everybody to be involved. And then in the end of each year, we will have a select out, basically, which groups are going home. And if two groups are equal, the public vote will count.
Okay, is it necessary to get rid of groups though if you've invested that much time into training them for the mission? Because you only have 6 groups approximately to begin with, and obviously you're getting more coming in every 2 years or so. But I was just wondering why it would be necessary to get rid of a group if all the groups are functioning quite well.
That's a good one. Yeah, it's a nice idea. All groups. No, you have to be better or equal as the others, and the groups will not be equal with the others. There will be always. When you're talking about every group is exactly equal than the others, it won't work that way. But
So I see. So you're saying by making the groups aware that there's always this risk that the least capable group will be eliminated, that will effectively cause them to be more motivated to be at the top of their abilities, at their best, and to train harder for the mission?
yes, that's one of the points, of course. And we also, as I mentioned before, it's always nice to talk to people, make interviews, but you see it only when they do it. You see really how good they are and how they overcome conflicts and what problems occur. So this is really where we'll see how they can perform, and it gives the chance the others who reapply, who didn't have a chance before, because a lot of applicants think it's over for them. Now, I don't know why they come up with that idea. You can reapply and you can be in one of the crews 2 years, 3 years later into the training, and you still go to Mars. If you're not selected now, it does not mean you cannot go to Mars. So and then this gives them the chance to come in as a new group, build a new group, and establish them and be better than the other established ones, and so on. So this gives them a constant competition, and it is kind of also sort of stress in a way, because you compete with somebody, you have a stress. But on Mars, it will be stressful by itself too. So you have to get used to do your best at any time you can, and every year you cannot lean back. I'm going to Mars. That's it.
So effectively, we're talking about almost Darwinian selection of the crews, where just the very best crew lasts to the end and then gets to actually go to Mars. Effectively, is that what you're suggesting?
Yeah, in kind of way, it will be not just one, it will be 6 crews, will be ready in the end to go to Mars. But yes, basically all the time. And I said, you cannot just lean back and say, it's done for me. So I want to really to push you all the time to do your best.
That certainly makes sense.
That you be better with other crews. And then there's one aspect, and I talked to applicants before, a lot of them forget. Applicants who have spouses, who have girlfriends and so on, they have to be aware of the situation, what the spouse thinks outside too, because we match up who fits best to each other, and that will be kind of a conflict point. Because you imagine you're outside as a spouse, and your husband, for example, is inside, and then he has this wonderful talk with the other crew members and said, oh my God, I didn't know he's so happy. Oh, I didn't know he says that. Oh, I didn't see all these things. So that will create, and that will be interesting, what it makes it. So some of applicants might quit and so on. So there will be situations occurring and into the group too. Because what happened in isolation gym, a lot of people don't forget that, is people, get attracted to each other very quickly, very fast. The problem is not the attraction. the problem starts when they start switching.
Ah.
And then how does
Okay.
the crew deal when somebody starts suddenly switching?
Do you have an idea on what kind of time frame you're talking there based on your experience and how quickly people develop attraction in isolation chambers?
Oh, no, we have done studies, but it's quicker than you think. Let's put it that way.
Okay. And well, one final thing I was going to mention about that actually, because you mentioned how each crew would have, say, their own organizational structure. You gave the example of like an anarchistic crew or like a military crew. What happens, say, when crew number 2 goes to Mars if crew 2 and crew 1 have different systems?
Yes, you're right. So we will simulate these things. So we will simulate, hey, you are crew number 1, you come crew number 2, and now you are arriving so-called on Mars, and then we'll see how they do.
So you do combined training as well. Okay.
Yes.
I see.
Yes, we will simulate that. Yeah. And see which crews are working well with each other, which crews have more problems. So we will simulate these situations too. Yeah.
So speaking about simulation missions, so we mentioned before how you personally have had experience in a 110-day isolation chamber. I believe it was part of a simulated flight of international crew on space station at Moscow's Institute of Biomedical Problems. So
no,
it
was to Mars.
Was I mistaken?
It was to Mars. It was not space station, it was to Mars.
Okay, fair enough. I'll have to correct my sources then. But what I was wondering, I've heard some very interesting things about things that happened during that simulation mission. So I was wondering if you could tell us a bit about your own personal experience.
Yeah, so the point is, a lot of reporters ask me, oh, did you see the light in the tunnel at the end, and couldn't you stand this environment and all these things? And I said, no, the environment did not matter at all. I didn't care if I don't have the contact rights, or I didn't care if I don't go out party and other things. That was not a problem at all. The problem were the people with each other. And because and that was an exciting study by itself, it was mixed gender and it was intercultural. And the cultural in the end clashed with the mixed gender. So you have to think about, and I can talk about because we have I published about it. It's the French Canadian female, and she's a very outgoing person. No? So she's very outgoing, and the Russian commander misunderstood this. He thought, oh my God, she's in love with me, because Russian women are not that outgoing. They're very, very lean back and
very
careful.
Reserved, yeah.
And instead of just talking with her, basically, and talking with her about her, he dragged her in the kitchen. Whatever happened, I don't know. She said he started to kiss her. However, a Russian woman would have slapped him in the face and said, never again. She didn't do that. She sued him on sexual harassment. So you see here a cultural complete misunderstanding between the cultures. And then the Japanese, who was in our crew, he had, at first, this situation happened. Then 2 Russians were fighting with each other, fist fights, bleeding nose and so on. And he got scared, completely scared. So he didn't know that in many cases in Russia, they just solved problems with the fist fights with each other. And after that, they were immediately buddies again. However, it shocked him. So we asked him before, what was the worst experience in our life? And he told us it was a car accident. After that incident, he said the fist fight.
Wow. It's really interesting how just the different cultures cause people to interpret the same events in completely different ways. So how in Mars One's case do you plan to mitigate this, or to train people to understand how different cultures interpret things differently?
At first, there are a lot of things I want. What I would like, and it will be difficult at I want that they always convey, and at least in the video, and we will watch the video later on, their thoughts. So I see this as an educational piece. So if you want to do something, you say it first, you thought, why you're doing things, what you're thinking. And everybody gets a better understanding on that, where you're coming from. Because the main misunderstanding is they don't understand what were your thought behind. So I give you an example. One of my friends, he is from the Netherlands, Jim Kaas, and he thought cheese is very nice. It's a Gouda cheese. Everybody loves it. And Dutch cheese, not everybody. He loves the Dutch cheese. And I thought, and he wanted to bring this as a present. So I thought, okay, wonderful. I would have loved to get such a Dutch cheese. So he brought it to a Russian colleague as a present, and he thought he would be happy. The Russian colleague said, do you think I can't afford myself to buy cheese?
Mm.
You see? So
I see.
very different.
It's completely different intentions, but yeah, it's interesting to see how the interpretations cause the wrong message to get conveyed. Obviously, there's just so many interesting psychological issues that we have to consider for this. How often do you just have in your mind, you just are left just thinking, oh, this is going to be so interesting, or I wonder what happens when we put this culture together with this culture? Because is this something that often just dominates your thoughts?
Yeah, so you have, and I see this way working, and it's like in America, especially with different cultures, and there you really have to start to understand, is he rude and impolite, or is this just his culture?
Mm.
So I interpret him, I said, oh my God, and then that's why I don't like writing, basically emails, because I think, my God, this is so impolite, and he meant it totally different. So to make it aware, and for the viewers too, what the different culture, what the thoughts behind is, why they are doing things, why they are saying things, might help everybody else to understand different cultures in a different way, and not immediately say, oh, you're so rude to me, and you did this to me, which is totally from my assumption, because I make this assumption actually wrong. He meant it completely different.
Actually, that was something that I hadn't thought of, actually, just the impact on the wider world, actually, of just seeing during these training missions, people from different cultures opening up and explaining why they're doing certain things, what their thought process is. So that's really interesting for the wider reach, actually. It's almost like almost educational for improving multiculturalism around the world. That's a fascinating offshoot, actually, of the programme. I'm sure there's many people, particularly watching this as well, who just can't wait to see the TV broadcast, because this sounds, it's not just about the mission to Mars. What is the thing that will really keep people watching is about the people that are doing it. This is a story about humanity as a whole. So it's going to be one of the greatest stories ever told, I think.
Yeah, and that's the point. That's really what out that we, as an educational piece, that we really start to understand different cultures, different generations. It's so you can play this generation, you can play this male and female, where they come from, which thought they are coming from, the generation one and the cultural one, why they are thinking, why they are doing things, and then we say, oh my God, he meant this and this. And then you go back home and say, oh, my wife said this yesterday. I misunderstood her completely. You know? So you get here an educational piece really to improve the quality of families, the quality of companies, where you start understanding other people where they are coming from.
This is good. So I believe that's all that I had written down. If there's are there any other things that you want to discuss?
No, that was actually the main issues. I mean, otherwise, it's important to see, and which you will look in the future too, if you're bored, because what it means, you're not creative. So that's the key issue. We saw in the master, I found that a lot of them were bored, and I said, okay, I wouldn't have taken them in the first place, because we're looking for creative people, and the moment you just bored, you get depressed, and that's the follow-up from that. You're not creative to do with your time, and I was not a single second bored in this isolation. So
I find that as well in just day-to-day life. There's always something like at least 6 or 7 different things I could be doing at any one time. So I don't understand how someone can just lie back and say, oh, there's nothing for me to do, I'm bored. That just doesn't make sense to me.
All right, and some say, oh, give them just enough work and they're not bored. That doesn't work. We have got 8 hours of work, and sooner or later we did it in 2 hours. So you learn how to be more efficient, and you reduce your work basically. So you have to do with the other time something. And yeah, I said, when you're bored, that will be definitely selected out. And that we will see in the future. I cannot ask that in an interview, because everybody says, no, I'm not bored. Why would I say that? No? So we will see over time how it plays out, basically.
Yeah, particularly in the isolation chains. Obviously, you've got controlled conditions there. You have continual monitoring. So I think that will be the best way to establish that. So, well, I'd just like to thank you again for your time. It's been a very interesting conversation, and I'm sure everyone watching as well has certainly enjoyed it, and to get the real insight from having such a world-leading expert. So thanks very much for your time, Dr. Kraft.
Thank you very much, Ryan. Take care. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.